Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Unity RPG tutorial series. So in this tutorial we're going to be setting up health and mana bars for our player. This can also be applied to our enemy as well if we're grabbing the stats from our selected enemy. But in this tutorial I'm just going to be showing you guys how to set it up for your player so that actively when their stats are changing we'll see that through a bar that's set up. So we're going to first need a couple of things. So for this, I'm going to be using a couple of GUI elements. I just created some, I believe, 8x8 textures here in Photoshop. So we're just going to be using a black background, green for the HP bar, and blue for the mana bar. Now you can change this if you want to be energy, if you want it to be yellow, or anything like that, depending on which classes you have selected. But for now, we're just going to be sticking with this. So we just want to go jump into our code. And we're going to be working out of our user stats script because this is where our main stats for our player is that we want to calculate. So we're going to be adding a couple of different variables here. So for our art, we're going to need one for our HP bar, our mana bar, and our background. Now these can be more complicated textures and better looking ones, but for testing purposes, we're just going to be using just basic colors. And for actual GUI bar stats, so this is the main stats that we're going to be using to calculate the length of the bar. So if you're at 100 health out of 100 health, then what we're going to be doing is calculating the length of the bar. And if that's cut in half, then the bar will be displaying at half depending on where we have it set up. And the same is going to be going for our mana bar as well. So right now we're just going to be using the legacy GUI, nothing really fancy. You guys can use the newer GUI system if you want for this. I'm pretty sure it's pretty simple just to plug in that into here as well. But for now we're just going to be creating a couple of GUI textures. And so we're going to be drawing our background, we're going to be drawing our HP bar and our mana bar texture onto here. And for the length, we're going to be setting it to use our HP bar length variable and mana bar length variable. So this is what we're going to be using to tell the actual length of the mana bar at the current time. So we're going to be calculating that in our update function, and we're also going to be keeping track with a label of the actual amount. So we can see that actually both of these adjusting. You can also add a GUI style to this if you want to change the text color. So you just have to set that up in your variables and go in and edit all that. If you guys want to look up GUI style, or maybe I can go over it later. But for now, this is our basic setup for our GUI. And in our update function, so what we're going to be doing is checking our cur HP. And if it's less than or equal than our max HP, then we do want to calculate these different values. And then from there, we're going to be checking if our cur HP is greater than max HP. And so if any of these goes over our max value, we want to equal that to what our current max value is. So let's say we have 80 HP and it ends up going over, let's say you get healed and it goes to 120 or something over your max, then we want to actually set the cur HP to what our max HP is. Now there's other ways we could calculate this to be more exact, but for now we're just going to leave it like that, just so it doesn't go over the amount that we specify as our max. So from this point, we also want to check to see if our cur HP or cur mana is below 0, and if it ever goes below 0, then we want to set it to 0. Now this should never happen depending on how your game is set up, but if we're using an ability, we're always going to check if our mana is greater or equal to the amount that we're going to be using. So if I'm casting a fireball and it's 20, and I have 20, then it would allow me to cast it, and if I only had 15, it would not allow me to cast it. So this is just, I guess, an extra way just to catch it to make sure that it doesn't go below 0 in any way. Because if someone is using some kind of drain mana attack and it's draining our mana or our health, we just don't want it to go below those values at any time. And as soon as we hit 0, our player should be dead, depending on if there's some kind of ability to bring them back to life or anything. But for now, we're just not going to get too complicated with it, and we're just going to set it up like that. So these are the basic stats that we need to calculate it and display it correctly. So I'll go into game real quick and I'll show you guys how this actually works. So I'm just going to select the player, And now for this, you're going to want to set your cur HP, max HP, and cur mana, max mana all to 100 or whatever value you want. You should set these to the same value, and yeah. And then we can scroll down to our actual HP bar, or all our different textures, and you want to plug them into the correct slot. So HP, mana, and then our background. So these are the three we're going to be using for now. And we can go jump in game. So now that we're in game, we see the basic setup here. Like I was saying earlier with the GUI style, you could change the text to black or something like that, just so it displays a little bit better on here. But for testing purposes, we're just going to leave it at this. So if we actually go into our player and we start adjusting our HP, let's say we get hit and we're going down to 80, you see that the bar calculates the actual percentage that we want to take away from that bar. So if we go down to 1, it'll be all the way down there, and then if we go back up to 100, it goes up there. You can actually change the max HP, so if your player had more HP, and 250 would be half, and you see that it actually calculates that it's going to half. And same with mana, it'll both calculate the same. Now, I guess one thing you could add to this as well are just background bars that is just for visual, just so we know exactly where the end of our bar goes to. Because right now we can't tell where the end or the max is. So if you wanted to create just the same thing, but just create that texture within that area, just so we can tell how much that bar has filled up. The same could go for XP bars or anything like that. If you guys have menus with different stats, you can use this setup. And if you actually want to increase the length, so let's say you want these bars to extend way out to here, all you'd have to do is just times it by a higher number. So if we times it by 200 for these, and we saved it, I'll jump back in and show you guys really quick. So now you see our bars extend way past there, and they act the same way. So if we do 50, it'll cut halfway in between. So yeah, that's a simple way to set those up. So I guess this would be more handy if you're doing an XP bar at the bottom, because XP bars would mostly extend really far along the bottom of the bar, or the bottom of the interface. So yeah, that's the different ways of setting that up. So if you want to include a bunch more stats, all you'd have to do is create something like percent of user XP, user XP bar length, and you just add in the extra stats and all the extra stuff that you want to create it about the exact same way that we set up here. It might be a little bit different. Probably wouldn't need to calculate below 0 or anything like that. You just make it so once you reach the max amount, you could change it slightly, like make the numbers a little bit higher for the XP bar. So yeah, that's a basic way of setting that stuff up, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.